In a world where space and time are intertwined, one man dared to challenge the status quo. His name? Dayton Miller. His weapon of choice, a flute. But not just any flute. This instrument held the power to unleash the ether, a pervasive medium once thought to fill the universe. Miller, a physicist by trade, a musician at heart, discovered a harmonic resonance within the ether. He found that his flute, when played with precision, could manipulate this elusive medium. His melodies, a symphony of science, had the potential to shift the very fabric of reality. However, a sinister force lurked in the shadows. The Einsteinian demons. These creatures thrived in the distortion of space-time, causing chaos and disruption. The world needed a hero, and Miller was ready to answer the call. With his flute in hand, Miller played a tune that echoed through the cosmos. Each note, a shot of pure ether, struck the Einsteinian demons, dispelling them back into the void. The world was saved, not by a warrior, but...
All right, we're live, gentlemen.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for being here for Ether Roundtable number 46. Tonight, we've got yet another deviation from our standard of, direct discussions about physics or presentations about physics or different topics like geophysics or cosmography or relativity or something like that. We're doing yet another kind of more meta discussion tonight about tools, things using, in this case particularly, Man of Stone has come to us requesting to give a presentation about Inkscape and VideoPad and doing multimedia presentations, essentially. So when Man of Stone came to us, we were not going to turn him down, that's for sure. So although it's another deviation kind of from our standard discussions, we're going to do this. And then after this, we're also going to have some discussion to kind of follow up and, ask questions about this. And I think we're also going to talk a little bit. I'm going to try and find out really what this Nick and BN thing is that's going on that everyone's talking about. So we'll talk about that a bit as well. And then, thanks again for being here, everybody. And without further ado, I think we're ready, Alan, if you want to go and kick off the video.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And just before you do, I would say to the crowd, everybody watching this, it goes by pretty quick. I don't waste time. I'm sure you've noticed by a lot of my previous production. So I'm sure you guys are going to get some questions together. By all means, write them down and give them to me at the end. I want to hear them. I want to make sure that they're answered. And as a special reward for everybody who can actually last through an hour of this, that I also have a special little musical treat for everybody to see at the end. So stick around, gang.
Look at that. This guy knows how to market.
Nice. All right, here we go. We're going to get right into it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This video is intended to put the FE community on a better path when it comes to graphics and video production. Sure, there are plenty of basic how-to videos on ScrewTube and the rest regarding graphics and video editing programs, but I've always found that the instruction in basic videos doesn't help me very much with things I'm doing at the time in the real world, both in my own work as well as production for others. So I'm going to take you through a few pieces of work I did long ago for actual customers I found on Fiverr.com before it turned into a woke DEI disaster area. The whole thing should take about 45 minutes, so let's get into it. This first customer had an image or two regarding wine production that he needed done up, and he wanted to look fairly organic, basic, and approachable, so we kept it simple. With Fiverr, you're always working with a time constraint, so sometimes things don't end up quite as polished in the end as they could. In this first segment, I'm going to be showing you a few procedures which cover what you need to know coming right out of the chute. And you'll see the keys I'm using popping up on the screen as I use them. These particular keys are all on the left side of the keyboard, so it's easy for gamers, for example, to use a hotkey without a lot of hand movement across the keyboard. The first is the function 1 key, which is what we use to select just about anything on the screen. The function 2 key is also a select function, but we use it to select handles, nodes, and the like, which are used to control things like Bezier curve handles. More on that later. We hit the B key to use what they call the pen tool, which makes use of the Bezier method of curve manipulation inclusively. The T key, of course, is all about using the text tool, and the D key is an eyedropper function, which samples colors and puts them into a selected object. Throughout this video, I will be using Control with the mouse wheel in order to control zooming in and out. Hit the T key to use the text function along with the standard clipboard keystrokes to change this text to make it look a little better. Once again, function 1 to select, and click outside of the work to deselect all. Control mouse wheel to zoom back out, and just the mouse wheel to scroll downward. Function 1 already selected. We're doing the same thing to properly place this text. Hit the T key and set up the text exactly the way we want it to look. Back to function 1, deselect all, and let's take a shot at improving the look of this arrow by creating a whole new one. Control mouse wheel to zoom, and a quick delete so we can start from scratch. Hit the B key so we can use the pen tool to create the new object. To begin, we click and drag while holding the mouse button down in order to create the orientation of the beginning of the line. If you also continue to hold down the Control key, the orientation of the line will be constrained to angles which are 15 degrees apart, relative to the horizontal or the vertical. Or you can release the Control key as well for anything in between. We repeat the click and drag process to create the direction that the arrow will be pointing at the end of the line. Then we hit the Enter key to finish the line that we're drawing. In order to format this line, we hit Control-Shift-F, which brings up the Format panel. Since we're modifying the stroke of this object, that's all on tab number 3. The term markers on line 3 actually refers to the things we put on the line to indicate direction or some other function, typically an arrowhead or a dot. In this case, we will be putting an arrowhead on the end of the line, which would be the end of the line we drew last in creating the line. And it likes to keep the ones you've used most recently at the top of the list. After using this tool a few times, you'll get the hang of what each arrowhead looks like in relation to the thickness of the line you just drew. And the size of the arrowhead will change in relation to changes in the thickness of the line itself. We make the line thicker, and the arrowhead gets bigger. Now we hit function 2 in order to fine-tune exactly what we want the line's curvature to look like. Click to select that node and the handle pops into view. Make sure that little dot turns red when you hover over it before you click it in order to make sure that that is the thing that you're selecting and not anything behind it. Repeat the procedure with the first node and you can see how the two handles interact with each other as you adjust one of them. Even with the function 2 selected, you can click outside the work in order to deselect all, but you have to click more than once in order to tell Inkscape that you're not trying to deselect the current node and then select a different one. Control mouse wheel to zoom out. Now let's play around with that tube a little bit. Still using function 2 to select it, the nodes used in construction of that line appear with none of them selected. Click the first node in the bottle and drag it to a new location. Then we play with the handles in order to make it look like the hose is coming directly out of the center of the bottle. Again, clicking twice outside the work will deselect all. Function 1 for select, then use the Shift with the mouse wheel in order to scroll your view sideways. A first click on the wine bottle gives you the impression that you've selected the bottle, but you don't know if you have also selected the contents of the bottle. So there's a technique where you click again in exactly the same spot, holding down the alternate key as well. This tells Inkscape that you're interested in selecting something which might be under the bottle and not currently selected. It's a bit of a toggle function. This is when we find out that the contents of the bottle is an additional object which has not been grouped with the bottle when they were drawn. More on that later. With the contents of the bottle selected, we then hold down the Shift key and click again to also include in our selection the bottle itself. Then, as we click and drag the bottle, we also hold down the Control key in order to constrain its movement along the horizontal as we drag it. Shift mouse wheel to scroll to the right, and Control mouse wheel to zoom in a little. And then simply hold down the Space key to mouse drag your view of the entire workspace to where you want to work next. Again, click outside the work to deselect all. Now, let's say we want to recreate this bottle where the shape of the bottle is a little less wavy. Hit the B key to select the pen tool and start roughly the same height as the top of the bottle. I used the same mouse drag with the Control key in order to begin the line in a horizontal direction. In producing this contour, I used very slow, small drags of the mouse in order to begin to create the kind of curvature I want to see in the finished bottle. Use the Control key with the vertical drag to create the side of the bottle. And at the bottom of the bottle, notice that I'm using two nodes to create the beginning and the end of the curvature at the bottom of the bottle. This gives me precise control as to how tight I want that curve to be. I can also hold Control down just before I make that final click in order to make sure it is on the same horizontal line as where I ended the curve. Enter to complete the line itself. I'm only drawing half of the bottle because I want the other half to look exactly the same. So now we're going to finish up the top of the bottle before we duplicate it in order to complete the entire bottle shape. Function 2 for the node tool. After selecting the final node, I hold down the Shift key in order to also select the first node. In order to bring up the alignment box on the right for the first time, you can hit Control-Shift-A. But since I've already done that before, it is stacked with the rest of the boxes I frequently use for formatting. When working with only a single line, the box only shows you the parts of its function which concern node alignment, as opposed to alignment of entire shapes. There are 4 buttons to show 4 different ways to align nodes, but we're only going to use the vertical one in this case. Because we selected the top node last, and in the box we see the drop-down is set to last selected, it means that when I hit the vertical alignment button, the bottom node, which was selected first, will align with the top node as I push the button. 2 clicks to deselect all, Control mouse wheel to zoom in. Here we merely click once to select a node and manipulate it along with its handles. Dragging that top node, I'm also holding down Control in order to move it exactly horizontally. And I'm doing the same thing as I drag the handles. Control mouse wheel to zoom out, and 2 clicks to deselect all. Function 1 to select the entire line. And we use Control D to duplicate the object exactly in the same place on top of the first one. This allows us to click and drag the duplicate object immediately in whatever direction we want. Here I'm using Control as I drag in order to move it horizontally. The dotted lines around the outside of the object are a decent guide to show you the space that object will occupy once we have flipped it on its vertical axis. Up in the top left, this is one of 2 buttons we use to flip an object either vertically or horizontally. I find it easier to click this button in the top left instead of moving my left hand across the keyboard to find shortcuts for these functions. Once we flip it left to right, it's about connecting the nodes of the object to each other in order to produce one single object. Control mouse wheel to zoom, and Control drag the left object so that it is fairly close to the original object in order to facilitate joining of the nodes. Notice that it tried to snap the two objects together, and I would have been satisfied with that on my own, but I want to separate the two ever so slightly so that I can show you the effect we're making on the nodes as we join them together. Control mouse wheel to zoom, and hold down the shift in order to also select the original object. Back to function 2, with the node tool, we drag select those two nodes. Up in the top left, we're hitting that particular button that takes those two nodes and creates a single node out of them at the point which is the average of both of their x and y coordinates. Now they are a single node which represents a midpoint on a single line. Control mouse wheel to zoom, and mouse wheel on its own to scroll downward, and control mouse wheel again to zoom back in. Drag highlight the two nodes and click the same button to turn them into a single node on a single line. Hit the 3 key in order to see the entire selected object. Function 1 so that the entire object is selected. In order to find out how thick the line is on the original bottle, we select the bottle and go over to the Format box and check that on the Stroke Style tab at the top. We then take that figure and apply it to the second object in order to make its stroke the same thickness. Enter to confirm the value. In order to make the stroke of the new bottle the same color as the original bottle, we hit the D key and sample the color of the stroke on the original bottle by clicking it once while holding down the Shift key. We do the same thing without holding the Shift key down in order to change the fill color of the bottle to match. Function 1 in order to deselect all. We now want to draw the shape of the wine in the bottle. To most efficiently do that, it's easiest to duplicate the new bottle and then remove the nodes which aren't needed in order to reproduce the wine in the bottle. Control D to duplicate it, function 2 for the node tool. Drag to highlight the nodes you want to eliminate and hit delete. This leaves you with one handle on each side of those two nodes in order to create the shape of the top surface of the wine inside the bottle. And we give it a little bit of wave shape to suggest that it is a fluid. One handle slightly above and one handle slightly below horizontal. Function 1 to select the same object. We then change the stroke of the wine itself in order to suggest that it is not part of the bottle and is instead something inside the bottle. On the left, the wine looks like it's inside the bottle because that layer is below the layer of the original bottle, and both are partially transparent. So we use the alternate key as we select the wine by clicking a second time and move the wine to the side so that we can see it on its own. But this time, we moved that object by holding down the Shift key and tapping the right arrow key. You could move it simply by repeatedly tapping the arrow key only, but that is set up in preferences as a much smaller incremental distance than when you are also holding down the Shift key. Both of these values are changeable in preferences, but I find that the default values are sufficient. Hit the D key for the eyedropper tool, one click for the color of the wine, and holding Shift down to click for the stroke of the wine. We then go back to function 1 to select, and the same Shift arrow keys to put it back in its place. Then select the newly colored wine and hit the page down key in order to drop this layer underneath the new bottle. This is how we make it look like the wine is inside the bottle. Now let's change the width of both to roughly match the width of the original bottle. Function 1 is still selected. We drag to select both objects at once. We can mouse drag that right arrow to simply change the width of the bottle by changing its width with respect to the left edge of the bottle. Optionally, we can hold down the Shift key and change its width with respect to the center of the bottle. In this instance, we don't see a lot of difference in how we change its width using these two methods, but in many other circumstances, you'll find it very handy that both of these methods exist. a quick select and delete to get rid of the original bottle. We then want to put the new bottle back into the image, and we want to pay attention to the layers that already exist in the image when we place the bottle. In holding down Control and moving it exactly horizontally, we find that the new bottle we just drew isn't quite in the same position as the original. Control mouse wheel to zoom in. Those little black scratches represent some sediment in the bottom of the bottle. Notice that by hitting the page down key repeatedly, we see that the sediment pieces were individually drawn and therefore are on each their own layer and have not been grouped together into a single layer. So to speed up the process with the bottle and the wine selected, we hit the End key, which brings the selected items to the very bottom layer or underneath everything else, just as if you had dropped all of these things on a physical desktop and each one is lying on top of the next as they were drawn. We then merely hit the page up key to bring the wine and the bottle in front of the two background layers, which are also partially transparent. We are also using the same technique of hitting the End key and then page up in order to make sure that it is behind everything but the background layers. This gives us the impression that the tube is indeed going into the bottle. Control mouse wheel to zoom out, function 1, and click outside to deselect all. What you can also see in the top right is another example of using transparent layers for almost everything in the image, so you can see one thing in front of another to produce the illusion that things are inside other things. I think Inkscape does a great job of showing the effect of partially transparent layers upon each other. That does it for this customer. Let's move on to the next. This is a customer who was selling a set of bingo card markers which have been repurposed for teaching small kids how to color. In marketing them, she had me put together a coloring book with artwork based on the work of the late Keith Haring from New York. This is a look at Keith along with some of his work. He makes really good use of very simple character shapes and applies a lot of motion lines and similar geometrics to fill the remaining space. Setting up a collection of rectangles or squares with each of the colors you plan to use in your project already filled in advance is a really efficient way to go. That way, you can just tap an object, select the eyedropper, and fill it with any color as a two-step process. From here on out, I'm not going to be showing the keystrokes on the screen. I'm only going to be verbally mentioning them as I use them. Here, using the Control Function 1, clicking to select each individual letter which is part of a group of letters. And you make groups of things by selecting them and either going up to the top menu under Object and clicking Group, or merely using the keystroke Control G. To make it easy, Inkscape has also set up the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-G to ungroup an already grouped collection of items. And of course, you can have groups of grouped items, etc. When you click one item which is part of a group, of course, the entire group is selected. Instead of having to ungroup the items in order to select just one of them, it's easier to use Control-Click to select one single member of any group of items. Here, we Control-Click the S and then hit D on the keyboard to select the eyedropper and click the color to which you want to change the S. Clicking outside the work to deselect all, Control mouse wheel to zoom out and back in. This black background fill is actually one of the bundled textures on Inkscape's list. So let's say that we want to change that from the bundled texture to something cool you found on the net. Something like this. First, we have to decide just how much of this we want to use in producing our new background. So let's take the element from the image and drop it on top of this background. I've used Control-Click to select that shape of the background and then copied and pasted it using basic clipboard keystrokes. After that, we select the background and then hold down Control and Shift as we drag it to a new size. The Control key constrains its dimensional ratio, while the Shift key centers the change at the center of the object as we perform a simple click-drag function. That looks about right. Now we're going to create what is called a mask. Essentially, a mask is like a window where the top layer is the glass layer and the bottom layer is what you see through the glass. The closer the glass color is to white, the more of the bottom layer you can see. When you set up the mask, everything outside the top layer becomes invisible. When selecting an object, you can typically tell whether the object is a simple object or a masked object by looking at its selection arrows. If the arrows form a box larger than the object, then it's very likely that you're looking at a masked object where the arrows show you the size of the background object used to create the mask. Here you can see that the top layer is not opaque, so we're going to change that using the Format panel. To bring that up, I typically hit the keystrokes Ctrl-Shift-F. With the object selected, the panel shows you the fill and stroke properties for that object. Here we simply drag the opacity field to the right all the way to 100%. Since the top layer is already selected, we hold down Shift to click and also select the background. Right-click and hit Set Mask. There you go, a nice pretty new background. After that, let's put it near where we're about to place it and then create a place for it to go. All we're doing here is dropping one object on top of the next, making sure to use page up and page down to move it to the appropriate layer. You'll notice that as I dropped it, the snap function helped me line it up perfectly. Here, you're seeing me doing nothing more than moving that black fill layer I mentioned to just behind the new background. At this point, all we can see is the stroke object and the newly created background. Say that we're not quite happy with how busy that background is on its own. A quick way to handle that at this point is to merely select it and change its opacity so that we see more of the black behind it. This brings down the brightness of the new background. And we're all done. The next piece is about a guy who wanted to borrow some images he found in an existing app on his phone developed by someone else. I think he was interested in creating an app of his own similar to it, but with slightly different function. Since the images on the existing app are fairly low resolution, he wanted me to make some nice, new, pretty ones in vector format, which can be changed to any size with zero degradation. So I pitched to him an offer and sent him a demo of what I would be producing for him based on what you saw on that first phone image. There are actually very few objects here. The spiral you see here representing the steam over the cup is actually very close to the default spiral Inkscape will start you with when you begin using that tool. As you drag it out to the size you want it to be, you can also hold down Control before you let the mouse button go, and it will begin the spiral at horizontal or vertical or 15 degrees away incrementally as you drag. The inner radius parameter is a ratio of the inner point radius against the outer point radius. As you will see, you also have separate control of the number of turns between those 2 points. The divergence parameter pushes the lines toward the outer point with values below 1 and towards the inner point with values above 1. Again, this is a ratio relative to the value of 1. And 1.0 will give you evenly spaced lines. It's something you can just play with until it looks the way you want it. And here we're simply adding to the number of turns. Once we break up the object, we can see that the coffee cup is made of very few constituents, and each one is made up of a couple of nodes in a closed path. For the mug, again, it's made up of very few objects. The text was created by drawing a curved line, creating a text object, and using the path command put on path in a very similar way to how the mask was created in the last example. When I lifted it away from its path here, it forgot some of its formatting. And that's not very important in showing you how the rest of this was created. In fact, I think you're going to like the simplicity of the methods used to create them. The orange line is just a copy of the same line I used as a path for the text to sit on. The 4 lines on the cup are actually little more than simple straight lines that have been formatted the way you see them here. Inkscape draws lines where you can format the ends of the line in 3 different ways. The square cap and the round cap will extend the end of the line proportional to the thickness of the line, and the butt cap will cut the line off right at the node. The body of the mug is a simple shape filled with what's called a linear gradient. On the Format panel, it shows you a thumbnail of the gradient from a first color to a second color. So let's duplicate that. We start with the pen tool by hitting B and draw it out using the Control key to constrain where the second point is drawn horizontally across from the first point. Function 1 to select the new shape. A quick way to format the stroke and or the fill of a selected object is to just go down to the lower left corner and click the null box, holding the Shift key down to change the stroke to none. Back up on the Format panel, click the Fill tab on the left and fill the mug with your first color. As you can see, there are many ways that you can tell Inkscape precisely which color you want it to be by using the sliders, entering numeric values directly, and making use of several different ways to describe a color, which are all tabbed right above the sliders. After you have your first color where you want it, click the Linear Gradient button. By default, it will show you gradient from left to right. This is where we select function 2 again, because a linear gradient is described using nodes in a similar way to how we draw Bezier curves. The handle on the left represents the color you've already selected. So what we want to do is change the orientation of the gradient. This is a simple click-drag procedure. However, you can constrain your dragging of the second handle by using Control as you move it. This helps you to produce a perfectly vertical gradient with ease. Notice that the 15-degree angle tolerance also applies to this function. By default, the second handle color is actually the same color as what you selected, but the alpha channel, which is essentially the same thing as the opacity setting, but it only applies to this handle color. So we slide the alpha all the way to the right and move the sliders according to taste. It's just that simple. Next, we're going to draw a teapot. And when you're a beginner, the easiest way to go about it is to use an image search to find a picture of what you would like to draw so that you can merely trace it and produce one of your own in vector so that you can produce it in any size with zero degradation. Using the tracing method to reproduce something like this, the first thing we do is right-click the image and lock it. This means that we can no longer select it as an object. In turn, it's far simpler because you can only select and change things that you draw. Let's start with the spout and use a single line to produce it. Hit B to select the pen tool and click-drag the first point so that you are creating a curve as you continue to add points. That's a good starting point. Enter to complete the line. Now let's change it so that we can see it on top of the original spout curve. Change the stroke thickness to match. And zoom in so that we can fine-tune the curve itself. Function 2 for the node tool and control mouse wheel to zoom in. Moving the node is a simple drag function. Let's change that cap style to round. And it doesn't matter that the right end of the line is also round capped because we can just put the other layers on top of it. That's pretty close. Clicking twice outside the image to deselect all. Okay, let's do the top piece next. B key for the pen tool. A single stationary click to start, and then hold Control in order to place your second point horizontally across from that point. And we drag that second point because we're starting a curve. Again, we only need to create the right half of the object and duplicate it and invert it to create the other half. Enter to complete the line. Now we want to align the first node with the last one so that they are vertically lined up. Hold Shift down and click pink to change the stroke of this line. Function 2 for the node tool. Click the first node and hold down the Shift key while clicking the second node and open up the Align panel by hitting Control-Shift-A. Notice at the top of the panel it is still set to last selected, which means that the first node will align to the second one when we hit the vertical button. Function 1 to select, Control-D to duplicate, and then drag while holding Control to move it horizontally. Once again, you can use its arrows to show you how far away from the first object it is when you drop it. Up to the top left to click Invert on the vertical axis. Control mouse wheel to zoom in and hold Shift down to select the second object inclusively. Function 2 for the node tool. Drag to select only those two nodes and back up to the top left to join those into one node at a center point between the two of them. And the same operation for the two nodes at the bottom. Function 1 to select the entire object, and we grab the top arrow to drop its height ever so slightly. Click black to change its fill color and Shift None to remove its stroke. Control mouse wheel to zoom out, and simply press the space bar and move the mouse to put the entire workspace where you want it in your view. Okay, let's make the body. B for the pen tool, and it's the same old tricks using the Control key and simple clicking. What you can't see, as I click the first point to close the shape, it draws the object according to the default pen settings. Hold down the Shift key and click pink to see the line you just drew, and head up to the Format panel to make it a nice thick line. After we're done drawing the objects, we can change the strokes to black fairly quickly. Next, let's draw the handle. Once again, B for the pen tool. And again, the same old tricks where we click once without dragging to start a straight line and drag click to...
You there, Alan?
Yep.
He listened. He stopped playing.
Where are you, Alan? Node to complete and draw the shape without having to hit Enter. I think your screen just froze up there, gal. Wow.
I think it might be the video.
Okay, we're back.
Yeah, it's still playing for
Let's
me.
make sure the volume is up.
Although there's no.
Oh, it is definitely my screen. I hear clicking, just no audio from it.
Yeah, we're good.
Very loud clicking.
Oh, that's weird. I must have killed the audio on this part of it. That's bizarre. I'm sorry for not checking this in advance. What we're doing is, of course, we're doing the inside fill based on what's already there. Same pen tool, same tricks. It's just that we're drawing the contents last. And
Kind of,
eyedropper, you're going to hit the D key to sample that color. There you go. And then you page down it to put it underneath what's already drawn. Oh my God, why is there no audio? It sucks. I can't believe I blew that. That couldn't. Murphy's getting my ass right here. Well, I'll be auditing or editing this file before I upload it anywhere else, that's for sure. So all I did was group them together, and we're pretty much done with this part of the project. And yeah, your screen is still glitching there, Bear. This is a piece of work given to me by my very
Whoa.
first customer. Oh, wow.
Hang on.
Okay,
What the
pause
heck?
that.
Dude, teach me how to do that. What'd you just do?
what's the hotkey to group 'em?
Yeah. Oh no,
This
back it
is a
up. Piece of work given to me by my very first customer. At the time, she had an irrefutably photogenic granddaughter and decided to take her love of seashells and create a children's storybook based on her. This little kid was just so creative and obviously centered that her grandmother couldn't resist spending this kind of time on her. She sent me this picture and the background, which you will see next, and asked me to draw a cartoon representation of her so that she could submit both to another person who was going to create the story and do the rest of the art. The first step is something that I did outside of Inkscape. I just isolated her and got rid of the rest of the background. The rest of the art. Your screen's still glitching, step, but we'll go with it. Something that I did outside of Inkscape. I just isolated her and got rid of the rest of the background. I then took a few steps to get rid of the extra grass touching her leg and foot so that I could draw only her shape. Function 1 and drag to select all, then hit the 3 key to zoom into it. That is the background she sent me, leaving only the task of redrawing her over top of it. And here we are. One of the systemic problems with working with clients from Fiverr.com is that there is almost always a time constraint which you place on yourself in pitching your ability to deliver the job as fast as humanly possible. So by the end of this one, we're going to improve on 2 very small aspects of this image in an attempt to perfect it. But first, let's talk about some of the other elements it took to create this image. In selecting, you can see that there are groups of objects. That makes it easier to isolate what you want to work on and move groups of objects out of your way to get at where you want to work. On her legs and foot, you can see that I have dropped some extra layers of slightly lighter skin tone to give you the idea that it's sunny out and give you an idea as to the contour of the shapes you're looking at. Control-click to select only that object of the group. You can see that these 2 shapes could be slightly shifted in location, and it still wouldn't matter much when it comes to portraying the 3-dimensional shape of the object. The outline of her fingers and thumb and hand like this kind of remind me of the way characters are drawn sometimes on South Park. I think you might see the resemblance. The polka dots on the dress are actually the duplication of the purple shape and filled with yet another bundled pattern of white dots, which you will see on the drop-down list to the right, along with quite a few other versions of it, as well as stripes and even that sandy background I used for the coloring book project. Personally, I think it's almost as fast to simply create your own geometric fill and create a mask like I showed you earlier. In this case, time was of the essence, so I used the bundled option. The belt is just a simple pen-drawn object like the rest of them. Here you can see the shell is a group of objects layered on top of her head but underneath the hand, and it is composed of a bunch of simply drawn shapes and lines. To draw the hair, I used the calligraphy pen. It's an interesting tool with plenty of parameters, most of which you can leave in the default setting most of the time. But let's cover a few of them here. On the far left, there are options to essentially pick the shape of the tip of the pen itself. Some of these use all of the parameters to the right, and some only use a few. The calligraphy pen changes in thickness based on the direction of the stroke, just like a real one. The fixation parameter controls the contrast between thick and thin in the line you draw. The higher the number, the greater the difference between thick and thin. The thinning parameter controls how thin the line gets using the fixation parameter as a guide based on how fast you draw the stroke. The faster the motion, the thinner the line. The angle parameter is the most intuitive one, controlling the angle at which you draw where the line is thinnest or thickest. Okay, let's take a few strands of her hair here and there and create some subtle highlights. Holding down Control and Shift to inclusively select specific lines. Under the Fill tab on the Format panel, we're going to slightly move the sliders to the right in order to create slightly brighter lines. What I'm doing isn't necessarily perfect here. I'm just trying to give you an idea of the direction you can go with this effect. Next, we're going to add some color to the lips in order to make her look a little more human. Again, that part of the face is grouped together in order to make it easy to deal with the whole image. In fact, all the lines that make up this face are collections of grouped objects. So we have to hit Ctrl-Shift-G twice to ungroup the group within the face group. Hope that makes sense. It's also a good move to take a second and lock the background so that we don't have to worry about it while making this improvement. Again, B for the pen tool, and we begin by tracing the existing shape, putting the nodes down the middles of these lines. We are also dragging when creating these nodes so that we have a complete control over the curvature afterward. And we finished the shape by clicking the first node. No need to hit enter. Let's fill the shape with the basic default starting color, which is roughly where we want to be. And hold Shift down while clicking None in order to show only fill and no stroke to the object. We then bring down the opacity value so that our final color is mixing with the existing skin color in order to create what appears to be a matching hue. Function 1 to select the new object, and page down to put it underneath the existing lines. Once we do this, we can see how few nodes are left that we have yet to manipulate in fine-tuning the finished shape. Control mouse wheel to zoom in. Function 2 for the node tool. We then just drag the node and play with the handles so that we roughly match the two contours. Everybody having a good time?
Loving it.
Sir.
Oh yeah.
All right. That was easy. Control mouse wheel to zoom out. And click the locked background in order to deselect all. The final thing I would like to change of this image is the hairline. Let's make it so that she looks a little bit younger. Still using function 2 for the node tool, we can now see that there are only 3 nodes to play with in making this change. And again, this is a matter of little more than dragging the nodes and playing with the handles in order to produce the contour you'd like to see. There we go, all done. Same operations to deselect and zoom out. Of all the jobs I did for clients on Fiverr.com, this one was the most enjoyable. This next piece of work was for an MD who needed some highly detailed work which could be dismantled in layers in order to show them each in presentation. Notice that the background rectangle units of measurement at the top show in pixels. This is a setting that you can change in document properties and is fairly intuitive. As you can see in the title bar of the pop-up, the keystroke Control-Shift-D is all you need to bring up this panel. The top field is where we changed the displayed unit to pixels. And instead of choosing a pre-formatted page size, we've chosen to enter custom pixel values right underneath. As you can see, there are quite a few different options when it comes to the units you'd like to use. Let's close that up and get back to the image. Click outside to deselect all. So for now, let's increase the size of the background so that all the objects will fit inside it. And let's give it a color that better contrasts what we already have. This way we can show off the partially transparent objects in a more visible way. The lungs were the hard work for this job, and they are made up of many, many different objects and layers, which are all grouped, of course. Click to select and Control-Shift-G to ungroup one step. Now I'm going to just pull them apart so that you can see them. None of them are very complex in the end. Even this layer is nothing more than a collection of some gray lines. And that is simply an extra layer of gray lines which weren't drawn on the first pass. The lung outline is a solid fill, but the background layer is actually a pair of linear gradients all on top of a darker layer to give it more of an opaque look. Most of the tree shapes for the lung passages were drawn using the calligraphy pen tool, using most of the parameters I showed you on previous work. It's merely a matter of getting the thinning parameter just right in order to suit the lengths of the lines you'd like to draw. Control-Z to reassemble that, along with regrouping everything. So let's put them together. This involves little more than dragging layers one on top of the next. The top layer of ribs is also only partially opaque in order to assist with the appearance of uncovering parts of the image the way you would encounter them in the physical world. Both the shoulder layer and the skin layer involve the use of radial gradients in producing the illusion of contour. Up in the top right, we want to make sure that we have this box clicked on so that the placement of the radial contours move in tandem with the object as it is moved. Click outside to deselect all. Let's take a look at one of those radial gradients. Control-click to select it and nothing else within its group. We can then drag it to a place where we can see it on its own. Control mouse wheel to zoom in. Function 2 to see the nodes that are used in its construction, both shape as well as the nature of the radial gradient fill itself. If we take the blur to 0 and the opacity to 100, we can see the real shape which was originally drawn. OK, Control Z to put it all back into place. Finally, let's play around with the background color a little bit in order to better see what this whole thing looks like when it's all put together. Alright, for this final Inkscape example, we will be using only the basic moves that we've been using this whole time in a scenario where we're going to make something to be used in another program. In this case, that program is SolidWorks. This file involves about a half a dozen layers, most of which are nothing more than a radial fill. The combined effect is something we apply to another object to make it appear like it's shining brightly. And it's a good idea to darken the background when working with shiny objects in order to better see them. Lock the background, and away we go. Function 1 to drag the whole thing to the right, and then Control-Shift-G to ungroup them. Click outside to deselect all, and begin dragging each separate layer to the left. Of course, I'm holding down the Control key while dragging in order to move them exactly horizontally. There you go, 5 layers, and the bottom one is nothing more than a red dot. For the pink layer, again, when we take the blur value down to 0, we can see the actual shape that was drawn. Function 2 for the node tool, and that shows us, as always, both the control nodes for the radial fill itself, as well as the nodes to describe the shape. And the white object was drawn exactly the same way. Control Z to restore the blur value, etc., and put it all back together. Now let's take a look at the video I produced in SolidWorks for the client. That was a 2-step process where I exported the video from SolidWorks and then use a regular video editor to put the two features together. Splendid. Since this is the only tutorial I will ever produce for Inkscape, I think it's a good idea to give credit and direct you to a certain YouTube channel where you can find a very large number of tutorials constructed in a similar way to this one by someone who is incredibly proficient and prolific in Inkscape instruction. That channel would be Logos by Nick. He has an immense collection which covers every single tool and function that you will never need to use in Inkscape. I could not more strongly recommend his channel. He is simply excellent. Alright, let's spend a final couple of minutes on some slightly less than intuitive aspects of video editing in general, and we're going to use VideoPad as the editor example. I'm not going to cover the basics of editing because this is a scenario where there's very little difference program to program. Instead, I'd like to cover the finer points involved in exportation of the finished product and the parameters which affect file size. You listening, Shane? When it comes to video pad, this top line option is the only one I ever use. And if you're like me, who leans a bit towards the OCD side of things, this is the only one you'll ever use as well. Clicking the default quality file size hyperlink on line 4, which is the file format line, will bring up the pop-up to the right, which shows specific bit rates and whether you're exporting mono or stereo audio. Lines 1A, 1B, and 2 in the lower left are color-coded to reflect the parameters involved. Starting with the resolution and frame rate, we are simply multiplying those three together in order to produce the bitrate for the video alone. 1280 times 720 times 29.97 gives you the base figure of 27 million, and on the right, 1000 kilobits per second is multiplied out to show 1 million bits per second, which is the target output rate of the export itself. In producing the total file size on line 2, we simply add the audio bitrate count with a modifier for whether the file will be output with mono audio or stereo audio. This is why you see 1/2 C in the formula. For a stereo file, we will be outputting at 192,000 bits per second. And for mono, that figure will drop to 96,000 bits per second, even though the final field will still show 192. To demonstrate what that looks like, I'm showing the exported file as a mono file and as a stereo file side by side. For ease of display, I've merely copied the size values from the General tab over to here to the Details tab. Windows never seems to get it right when it comes to telling us the exact audio bitrate that 98 represents the 96 for mono, and then 195 represents the 192, as shown on the first slide. So I hope this gives people the resolve to take full control over the file size of the videos you produce and circulate to the community. That's it, gang. We've reached the end. Thanks for watching.
Nice. The file size that you inflict on the community. Probably should have said.
Precisely in your case, yes.
The massive amount of guilt that I feel over that file
Yeah,
size now
I
is
feel really
insane.
Nope, we're doing 4K, everyone. Now go flood Stone's channel with 4K video uploads if you need to break it into multiple
360
chunks.
I got the width now. Go for it.
Actually, maybe we'll do 8K. Why not? Just in case someone happens to have a really fancy display.
You guys don't have a full 360 VR rig? Because I do. That's how all my videos are coming out now.
This reminds me of the Adobe Illustrator classes I took in high school, but it's this is much more informative and intuitive than this guy is like reluctantly teaching it.
Reluctantly
Honestly,
teaching.
There was a gym
He
teacher.
didn't want. Okay.
He
Yeah.
was a
Oh,
gym
glad
teacher
to
who
see
hurt
I
his
scored
leg
better
using
than that.
Illustrators.
Honestly,
Very glad to see I did better than a gym teacher. That's hitting the mark high there.
Yeah,
watching
what
you-
version of Inkscape is that, Stone?
Well, I used to use 0.48, but the one you are looking at here is 1.0. After
Okay,
reinstalling Windows,
that's why it's different than mine.
I grabbed
I'm on
1.0.
1.2, so I won't. If anything, I'll have more features, not less. That's probably good.
Well, yeah, one or two more on the everything you're ever going to use effects panels and stuff. The amount of tricks in Inkscape is absolutely blinding, and
Yeah,
I showed you nearly
Oh,
none of them.
absolutely. Oh well,
And
even that was a lot more than I ever use in Inkscape. But
Cool. Well,
I don't use Inkscape a ton, but that was I know it's a really useful tool, and that was a great demonstration.
that's why I felt like I had to tack Nick on the end, because he covers every last one of them in this kind of detail. You've really got to hand it to the guy. It's an awesome channel. I cannot recommend it enough. It's fabulous. So we do have a question over on YouTube from Cations. So I was just going to read that out. He's just downloaded last week. Yeah, hoping to make illustrations for this. But he says, is there a way to transform dodecahedrons into perfect circles in Inkscape while keeping the precise layout? Smoothing a polygon into a circle. Well, if it's a polygon that was drawn by Inkscape, yeah, using the node tool, you'll find that there are extra buttons at the top. There are 4 of them that can actually change the node type. And one of them is kind of like a stereo balanced node where when you're trying to create exactly what you're looking for, curvature, instead of one angle changing to another at every node like 12 times in a dodecahedron. So that's where you'll find your answer right there. You change the node types themselves. You can highlight them all at one time, punch the button once to change them all instantaneously, and then you just hit each one.
Tutorial, but at the same time, you did a lot of like artistic things in there. But it's still like
Thanks, man.
it was cool because it kind of gave it a dual functionality. Because even if you
Spend a few more hours at it, and the next thing you know, you're fluent. It's really not that hard. It's not that complex. If you want to get really complex, go see Nick. He's got about another 100 videos for you to make your head spin.
Well, good. I wanted 100 more videos of Inkscape tutorials to watch, so I'm glad I know where to find them.
You don't have to look them up again. They're already there in the file. All right. Well, hey, you guys ready for a cool video treat? That's the question, hey?
yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me set up a little share here. We're going to do the whole
Oh, I'm back. Sorry about
I'm
that.
gonna count on
Hey, Alan's back just in time.
well, you've been gone for the last
Just in
hour and 20
time.
minutes.
No, the last 3 or so.
No, just
Okay.
kidding. Just kidding.
Oh,
All right.
No
Well,
one heard you go. We only heard you come back.
here we are with my stream coming up. That's full screen. And yes, I have created rock video number 3. And I think you guys are really going to like the subject matter. Let's just call it that. All right, you guys ready?
yep.
That's what it's called. Rock and roll. All I can say is don't blink because it's only 2.5 minutes.
Click that little hide button.
Particles of mass that's all around. Talking about light propagation, something that just can't be found. Talking about light propagation, acting just like waves too. Talking about light propagation, that's a lie, I thought you knew. Talking about light propagation, this is light propagation. How does it come from years away? Talking about light propagation, all that time reaching us today. Talking about light propagation, gravity don't cause no deviation. Talking about light propagation, that's the deal with light propagation. Talking about light propagation, it's light propagation, baby. Light propagation. Anisotropic plate is day. Talking about light propagation. Aether's here and it's here to stay. Talking about light propagation. Ain't no crazy postulation. Talking about light propagation. I'm just talking about light propagation. Talking about light propagation. This light propagation. Talking about light propagation. C plus V going up and down. Talking about light propagation. Back and forth to your side of town. Talking about light propagation. Fang and Wang had a lot of nerve. Talking about light propagation. Zero motion, straight off. Talking about light propagation. This is light propagation. This is light propagation, baby. Talking about light propagation. This is light propagation. This is light propagation, baby. All
Wow,
right.
I was awesome. I like that you did this
Amazing.
stutter
That
when
was
you
great,
said
bro.
straighter
That was great.
curves.
Thank you.
Dude, did you have a custom made slide with Jesus with a slogan that said "Let the
Dude,
no,
that was
I lucked
awesome.
right out. I lifted that.
That was epic. That's my new intro
Yeah,
for
that was
everything.
cool.
It's my new
I knew
Discord
it. I knew
announcement,
Alan
new
would like
theme
that.
song. That's my new everything. Send that to me
That was
immediately
great.
in the highest quality versions available. I don't want any of
Yeah,
that
I'm gonna
reduced
need a
shit
rep
that
of a
you've been
video
peddling.
version of
I want that. I want the highest audio available. That's fucking
That
great.
was awesome.
Yeah, is
I-
that
I like
going
it
out?
too.
Is that going to be posted?
You bet. Same old places
Awesome.
as usual. You guys all got the sneak peek right here.
Nice.
And you'll be happy to know it's a